Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Melanie Dean. I'm a psychologist, a scientist, and a Hay House author of the book, The Hidden Power of Emotions. And you're listening to the Wavemaker podcast, where we explore how your emotions are real energy waves that are more powerful than you think. And so are you. When you learn how to tap the power of your emotions, you can attract everything in life that you want. It's not just positive thinking, it's science, and I will show you how. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining today. We have a special treat in expanding our topic of how our energy works, the science of how our energy works, and most importantly, how we make it work for ourselves so that we can really create the life that we want. So you've probably tuned into some of my teachings before, but if not, then I will remind you that the energy of getting what you want in your life is real, scientifically real power that really is generated from the real energy of your emotions. Your two strongest emotions are setting clear intention and then tuning into your intuitive guidance. Your intuition is an emotion. So today we get to expand on that together. We get to consider a broader look at intuition and how setting clear intentions filters into that and how it becomes powerful in our life to help us not only create what we would like to have happen in our own lives, but also to improve the lives of others, to really improve our global community. So today, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Helané Wahbeh. She is Director of Research at Institute of Noetic Sciences in California. And she's the author of the award-winning book, The Science of Channeling, Why You Should Trust Your Intuition. I'm all on board for that. And embrace the force that connects us all. And we're all on board for that. So thank you and welcome, Helané, for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie, for that introduction. It's wonderful to be here with you today.
Well, I wonder, your book is called The Science of Channeling, and if you would help our listeners and viewers understand what channeling is, and is that very much different than paying attention to your intuition?
Great question. So I use a really broad definition for channeling. Some of you may have heard that word before in association with different experiences. So I define it as this process of accessing information and energy from beyond our conventional notions of time and space, and that can appear expressive or receptive. Now, that's a mouthful, right? Let me give you some practical examples. So, channeling, from my perspective, exists on a spectrum. And on one end, we might have very common experiences like gut hunches or intuitive hits. On the other hand, you might have more rare experiences like trance channeling or mediumship, and then everything in between, like precognition or knowing the future, or getting mental impressions from other people, which some people call telepathy. So all of those things, from my perspective, go under this broad umbrella of channeling. So when you say intuition or tuning in, I would also put that under the broad umbrella of channeling. And for me, it's really about the unique ways that people can do it. So, our human mind likes to put boxes or terms to things, and yet the experience of tapping into our inner wisdom is really quite variable depending on who you talk to. And so, regardless of what term we give it, that innate human capacity to tap into that intuition is really what the book is about.
So I love that word, the inner wisdom, because that is what our intuition is. It's our inner GPS, our built-in guidance system that the universe, the energy in the universe that we scientifically participate in all the time, whether we know it or not, and we're receiving information back, whether we're tuning into that or not, but we're always participating both in an exchange and in receiving communication. So your channeling seems to me the kind of ways, all the myriad of ways in which we can receive that communication that's beyond our five senses, beyond what we normally think of as receiving communication with our eyes and our ears and touch and things like that. So can you help the audience understand how this channeling might feel inside of them if maybe they're channeling and they don't even know it?
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I just want to add a piece to what you shared about. So not only is it about receiving information, but it's also about how we affect the world. So in your intro, you were talking about intention and kind of manifesting what you'd like in your life. So that's our kind of mental intention influencing the physical world. So I wanted to add that little piece in there. So I propose that all humans have the capacity to channel or have intuition, that it's this innate born capacity, and that the way it shows up for them is unique. And we've coined another term called the noetic signature, because it is like a signature, and that everybody has their own unique way to be intuitive or to channel. So we've done a number of studies now exploring the noetic signature and how it shows up for people. The first study asked over 500 people to write out with text their experience of intuition or channeling. And we did a whole qualitative analysis of that text. And we found some really interesting themes. One was around how people engage with their intuition, whether it's going into nature, whether it's doing some sort of ritual, whether it's through meditation, whether it happens through their sleep. There was incredible variety with how people tap into that intuition. And then there was this whole theme around ways of knowing, which is what you are alluding to. And there's 12 characteristics that we discovered through future studies of looking at the noetic signature, and I'll just go through a few of them. One is embodied. So I'm high in that characteristic because I actually feel goosebumps. So if I'm faced with a decision and I'm trying to decide between two things, my whole body will become activated when it's the one that usually ends up working out best for me. So I can tap in, be aware of the sensations that my body is giving me as an intuitive message, if you will. Other people don't get that at all. They might actually visually see things. They might visually see a symbol, or they might see colors around people. So that's another type of characteristic. Other people might hear guidance, like a voice in their head. And I want to distinguish that this is different from schizophrenia or a mental pathology. That, for example, we had so many stories of people who were protected from danger by hearing a voice in their head. So they might be at a stoplight, the light turns green, but they hear a voice, stop, and they don't move. And then a huge, semi barrels through a red light, and they would have, been in a really severe car accident. Numerous examples like that, which were quite fascinating. So hearing this internal intuitive voice. Let me see. Another strong characteristic was receiving intuition when you're dreaming. So there were many people who actually receive intuitive information while they sleep. So those are just a few examples to give you a taste for the variety of how intuition shows up for people.
I can really relate to that. I've heard many descriptions myself of how intuition shows up for people. I've heard people describe it as just a calm, clear knowing in their gut that's very calm and clear. My intuition shows up for me in this big, bold burst of energy. That's it. And so it's just, it's very high inside of me and a big, big increase in energy. Now, I think that one thing that our intuition rarely does, at least in my experience, is that it's not chaotic or anxiety. It doesn't come across to us in a tense, bewildering, chaotic manner. It communicates our intuitive guidance, communicates with us similarly in the ways in which we allow it, through a calmness, through being in touch with that energy that can kind of make it through to us. I think in your book, you described the importance of clear intention, and you also described the importance of a clear mind so that we can actually receive this information. And perhaps that's what I'm meaning, that when we're receiving the information, it's not in a chaotic way. It's in more of a clear way when we're actually in touch with it. From my understanding and experience with it. How would you relate to that?
Well, through our research and others' research, we have found that meditation is actually one of the strongest predictors for people being able to have these experiences, to do well on laboratory tasks where they're tapping into their intuition. So we have an evidence base around this calm, quiet, still mind and being able to access that. Anecdotally, you hear that from people all the time, that, all the ways of engagement support people to get into a somewhat altered state of consciousness, that it's not the normal kind of waking, busy mind, if you will, that allows us to receive that wisdom. Now, you mentioned a number of different themes kind of in your comments and question about this. I will say that, we may receive an intuitive hit, and usually it is associated with a sense of expansion or a sense of calm, if you will. And yet, let's say that it is something that our ego mind or our personality doesn't actually want to do, right? It has some resistance around it for whatever reason. That may then quickly create fear or anxiety or contraction. So there's a lot of practice to be able to discern the nuances of what's really an intuitive hit from my, inner wisdom, and what is my ego, personality, whatever you want to call it, my patterned behavior that's potentially reacting to it. Mm-hmm. And when people first start out, that's one of the most common questions. Well, how can I tell? How do I, really get into this? And, I advise people to even practice it just 5 minutes a day to find that quiet stillness. Not that you can't receive intuitive hits when you're busy in your daily life. It's just a signal to noise issue, because there's so much input coming in from your five senses, from conversations, from stimuli around you, that it may be harder to hear it if you're not practiced at it. You also mentioned this piece around calm, etc. I think one of the easiest ways for people to start engaging in this process is to practice by asking a yes/no question and using their body. The body is an incredible instrument that allows us to feel into this. And usually a yes is a sense of expansion and kind of feeling more relaxed, more open in the body. And a no is more like contractive and going in on itself. So I don't know if I answered your question around that, but there were multiple little layers in there that we could explore.
Well, I appreciate the going into the complexities of it, because on the surface, if you just say, well, my intuitive guidance is like what I had said is going to be generally calm to match this state in which I receive that guidance. But what is so important is to be able to use that guidance in everyday life, which means what you're saying, which is develop the skill for what that feels like inside of you. Each of us have a different way of having that knowing and where it sits in our body and how it feels to us. When we develop the skill, then we could use it on the fly during our busy days to actually get the guidance as we're going along throughout the day on best decisions to make, or the example you used where somebody would be sitting and just have a great big stop, don't do that, and so they would have to be attuned enough to say, I'm going to pay attention to that. I'm familiar enough with how my intuitive guidance works to pay attention. Don't just go.
Absolutely. Sorry.
I was just going to ask then if you would expand on that in the uses for developing this skill and how it can help people in their everyday lives.
Yes, I was just going to go into that too about, often people want to start with like big decisions, like, should I quit my job or leave my marriage? I would not start practicing this on life-altering decisions. I often give the example of just starting simply like, hey, is this food good for my body right now? Or, which park should I go walk at? Or, just really simple decisions that are not going to create any trauma in your life based on them. Mm-hmm. And it's like working out. It's like building your intuitive muscle. And when you first go to the gym, you don't start bench pressing, 200 pounds. You start with the lightest weight. And it really is about this practice. And the more you practice, the more you start being able to easily discern what is intuition and what is the mind. The other thing I wanted to share is, and I'm noticing the sun's hitting my camera. Sorry, 1 second. I'm going to fix that.
Oh.
There we go.
Oh, great.
The other thing that people will notice is when they start this practice, let's say they're making a decision, they choose one way, and that path creates greater ease in their life. They feel more energized. Moving towards that decision point is easeful. Synchronicities show up, and you're like, oh, this feels really good, right? If we do this practice and perhaps don't get a clear signal and we make a choice and it feels like we're hitting our head against a wall, nothing's working, nothing's showing up, the people aren't calling back, the loan's not going through, then it's like, okay, well, maybe that's not actually where I need to be going right now. And then we reassess. So instead of continually banging our head against the wall saying, no, this is what it was supposed to be, we have the wisdom to say, okay, let's stop. It's not flowing. It's not, synchronicities aren't showing up. So let's try it this way. So those are little tips that, I practice daily. And it's not this magic thing that just shows up and it's, incredible full power. It really takes these micro baby steps, micro baby practices that really support people to use it in their daily life.
I am recalling, in your book, the concept that we're all really participating in a much larger, greater world than just ourselves. We're involved in this large field of energy. And so when you just talked about the little baby steps and doing this little bit and then maybe retuning and going back because you're banging your head against the wall, it also just allows us to stop and know that there's lots of people in the world. And sometimes we proceed along a pathway, and then there is somebody else out there that's made some decisions and done some things that alter what now our circumstances are. And so now we have to retune, we have to re-ask, we have to recenter ourselves and say, now what? And give ourselves the opportunity to take the next step that might be in a little bit different direction. So I think it's helpful to talk about that really using our intuitive guidance is most often a little step at a time rather than a great big jump in, as you say, should I get married or should I get divorced or should I move or should I not? Those are some great big things, which you can certainly ask and you can certainly get the guidance you need when you're well practiced and really attuned to already being able to touch base and know how to proceed on the more small things.
Absolutely. And, in my book, I have a whole chapter on discernment because we also have this incredible intellect. And I feel like we really thrive when we can use both, that when both are actually balanced. The whole proverbial thing of if someone told you to jump off a cliff, would you jump off a cliff? So, if you get guidance that doesn't quite make sense, then, that's an opportunity to practice discernment and go more deeply into it.
So how are some ways that people can practice discernment so that they could feel more confidence in whether what they're perceiving is actually their channeling intuitive guidance, or whether they're in their head, their mind, their ego, or listening to somebody else instead of themselves, like somebody telling them to jump off the bridge. So how do people practice that discernment, and how can they tell the difference if they have a question mark? Sometimes it's very easy and clear. You don't have any question marks, but lots of times you have a question mark.
Yeah. I do this myself, right? And so it goes back to what we were talking about, this contraction versus expansion, and then just taking the next step. And if things open up, then it's like, oh, okay. It's being willing to be loving and kind and patient with yourself and actually moving forward towards that direction and seeing what signals you get. And you brought up something really important, two important points. One is projecting our authority outside of ourselves. So the beautiful practice of intuition is that it really is going within to find wisdom for what works for you, because what guidance you get for your own life may be totally different than the guidance the person next to you would get. And in our Western culture nowadays, we are just bombarded by external opinions, advice, information, and it can be overwhelming to try to figure out how to live a healthful, joyful, quality life. And so that's what I really love about intuition, is that instead of, oh, what did they say? What did they say? What did they say? What should I do here? That it allows us to really say, well, what is in my highest and best right now for me? The other important thing that you kind of alluded to was this concept of timeliness. So many people will, if they don't feel comfortable attempting to practice this on their own, they will go to a psychic or a medium, or they'll go outside of themselves to get guidance, which I'm not saying that's a bad thing at all. But often people will project their authority onto that outside guidance, and they'll also hold it in stone. So-and-so said a year from now that this is going to happen. But just you getting that information changes it changes your thoughts, changes your emotions, changes your choices. And so when the year happens and that thing doesn't show up, then you're like, oh, well, they were wrong. Not necessarily. In that moment, perceiving the path that you were on, maybe that's what was going to show up. But then there are all these micro changes. And what you said, other people made different decisions. And then, the future looks a little bit different than what this person said it might. So I have found that this guidance is much better in immediate time frames, that it is much harder to tune into what I should be doing 5 years from now than what I should be doing next week or the week after, because everything's always shifting and changing. And my personal experience is that the future is not predetermined, that we are at choice, we do have free will, and that things shift and morph. And it's more like a many, many different possibilities that have greater or less probability of occurring. And so if I go along this path, this is more probable to happen than this thing. But based on the choices that I make, that will shift over time. It may be different next month.
Well, I really do appreciate that, because it's such a common struggle that everybody has, which is having confidence in your own abilities to tune in and get your own wisdom and guidance, and being confident in that. Every day we perhaps listen to well-meaning family members or well-meaning friends that would say something that would derail us from the pathway that we think would be best for us to proceed. And we give away our power to them by saying, oh, well, I guess maybe they're right. They probably know, they've known me a long time. And so we defer to other people very often rather than considering what they have to say, and then take it into your own quiet time, where then you practice your own discernment on what is the pathway for you. So we've touched on this, and let's, if we can, just reinforce it for our audience, which is, how can we really have confidence in the perceptions that we're having, the channeling ways that we're receiving information? How can we kind of say, okay, I really think that is it? How can we develop that confidence?
I think it shows up with the results, because as you start practicing and you start listening to yourself, you set the intention that your intuitive signal is stronger, clearer, shows up for you in a clear and definitive way. And then you start actually taking action in your life based on that. Then you see, wow, things are getting easier. Oh, this thing showed up. Oh, that thing showed up. And that positively reinforces you to then practice some more. And it's like continually building that muscle, continually building that practice, and the insecurity just melts away, because you're like, hey, I know what it feels like when I'm getting a clear signal and I take action, and how things open up for me. It's just manifesting in a very practical, real way in my life. Now, I've been doing this for I don't know how long. Are my signals always 100% completely accurate? No. And there's lots of things that affect that. If I'm too emotionally attached to something, like if I'm wanting inner guidance on something that I have a big emotional charge on, or I'm really attached to, I really want to do this thing, then my signal's not clear. And I just know that about myself. And so then I reach out for support from other people to help me with that. So back to this confidence piece, when we step into this place of open curiosity, love and kindness and patience, and without this kind of like taskmaster, like, you got to learn how to do this, you have to be 100% accurate, you screwed up if you got it wrong. Just no, it's like very just gentle, kind, small step way. The confidence just blooms. And I've seen it over and over and over again in everyone I've talked to about this topic, that the doubt really does just dissipate naturally over time as you start practicing.
Well, I really like that, to just generalize the experience of it, to allow yourself to calmly and just easily grow the skill without being hard on yourself. I was surprised about something that I read in your book, which was how common it is that people experience these ways of knowing, these inner ways of knowing, whatever we want to call that, channeling or intuition, or the myriad ways we know something. And I think you said, if I remember that correctly, 80% of people say that they experience these ways of knowing.
Yes, it's quite incredible. Once I started digging into the literature, I was completely amazed, because if you are in certain circles, especially in academia, it's so taboo. And you would think that it was very rare and that there wasn't a lot of evidence around it. But in fact, there have been studies done all over the world looking at what we call the prevalence, which is how common these experiences are. And the percentage ranges from, 10%, I think was the lowest one, all the way up to above 90. And this is in, multiple countries. Tens of thousands of people have answered these questions. We at IONS did a really fascinating survey of 3 groups of people: the general public, IONS supporters, and scientists and engineers. And we had thought that perhaps it would be less common in the scientists and engineers because of all the taboos that we see. It actually wasn't. And we saw, like you mentioned, over 80% of the people that we surveyed had at least one of 25 intuitive experiences. So that was incredible to us to be able to see that. We even removed the items that they could have maybe misconstrued as normal empathy instead of clear empathy, and it was still over 80%. It was amazing. So these experiences are worldwide, incredibly common. You imagine being at a party, 8 out of 10 people that you talk to will say, "Oh yeah, I had that too." But people are afraid to talk about it. So one of the goals of my book was to just bust that open so people could feel very comfortable starting conversations, be in dialogue with these various aspects of ourselves that, most of us have.
So our energy's out there mixing it up in the world, whether we're aware of it or not. I really like then, and I would like to close on this aspect of it, that we have the power to influence and improve the world through the intentions that we set out. But if you would just speak to, how is it that using our intuitive guidance, our channeling abilities, can help improve the world and help improve people in our community? How can we use that skill?
I love that question. On an individual level, I mentioned this multiple times, that when people start tapping into their intuitive wisdom, their lives become easier. They become healthier. They become more peaceful. Their quality of life improves. Then that ripples out because it affects their relationships. If they're more easeful about their life, then their loved ones become more easeful. And often they're like, "What's going on with you?" And then they can teach others to do it. So that's kind of more on a micro level. But if you take it even further beyond that, imagine that we have access to this incredible information that can support us in trying to solve the very challenging issues we're trying to deal with. So you imagine, troubleshooting in communities. How do I, reduce conflict? How do we deal with this, unhoused population? Or how do we deal with pollution and inspiring people to care for our environment? How do we, improve global warming? I mean, there's so many ways that we can apply this ability to tap into information, wisdom to support us in our individual, societal, and global issues that we're all facing today.
Well, what a great note to end on. It certainly gives us motivation to develop this skill, not only for improving our own life, but for contributing to a better world for all of us. So thank you so much for joining us today. Can I ask you, if you would, to direct our listeners to where they can get more information about your book and more information about the research that you're doing?
Thank you so much, Melanie. It's been a pleasure to be here today with you and your audience. The best place to find out about all this work is on www.noetic.org. That's the IONS website. It has our publications, it has our projects. You can participate in research projects. It has a page for my book, which is now also an audiobook.
Well, thank you so much. We've been listening to Dr. Helané Wahbeh, and we say thank you. You've given us so many pearls of wisdom and science and understanding and many good things to put into practice. So I thank you for your time today, and I look forward to staying in contact. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Melanie.
That's all for today's Wavemaker podcast. Thank you for listening. I have so much more to share with you. So be sure to tune in next month. And remember, go to my website, www.melaniedean.com, and join our free Wavemaker community, where you will receive even more science-backed advice for unlocking your emotional power.